My bad. I'm sorry. I'm really quiet. Okay, so today we're talking about the House of Cups. I wanted to get started. We're continuing on our trend. We're going with the series that we're promoting is for understanding each of the suits as a meditation. Now, I don't use tarot for trying to predict the future. I use tarot as inspiration and finding a way to really bring inspiration and to get ideas and to bring a lot of things to mind. And so I will use each of these suits as a meditation, as a contemplation. Now, when we talked about the in the House of Coins, which is the suit of Pentacles, that was Earth, and we talked about elemental earth, and we talked about elemental fire with the suit of wands. And again, my view of elemental fire comes from Henry Cornelius Agrippa. And he is an author from the 16th century that was talking about the ideas of what was the intellectual forefront before science came into being. That during the Renaissance there was a transformation into observational science, and before observational science was a philosophical approach, and part of that philosophical approach was an elemental view of the world. Now he discusses the four elements, but the four elements don't get broken up quite the way that we discuss it today. The modern view of this in astrology and in other things is kind of it's taken a few twists and turns, and I like the original stuff that Agrippa talks about in the 16th century because it fits really well with a couple of other models that we have. So Earth is not just Earth and groundedness and solidness, but it's also the fecundity of life. It's the fertility of it's the raw material of things that are growing, and that's both in a natural sense and in an industrial sense. It's basically the manifestation into reality, bringing things into reality. The second element that we're in with fire is fire being not so much fire as in flame and fire and destruction, but actually being fire as in radiant light and energy of life, things that instill life into things, initiative, and also it ties into the mind, so the intellectual, the reason component of things, the combination of the power of ideas put together with the impetus, the drive, the ambition that one gets from having ideas and from having things that they really need, they absolutely feel as though they need to do, they need to make happen. So with that, we've done earth and fire. Now we're moving into water. Now water in the elemental sense is the necessary ingredient for life to thrive, for life to happen. Without it, desiccation happens. And so like earth and fire, where we have this notion of just of this material aspect being an observation of a larger concept, so too with water we have that as well. And so in the water component, we're looking here at a conversation of soul, the thing that makes life worth living. And the thing that makes life worth living in many ways is the beauty of life. And beauty is an essentially emotional component. So the way that I look at this is the House of Cups speaks to our emotional experience of life, the way that we see life and the way that we engage in life in an emotional way. Now, one of the tricks that comes up is that just as ideas can be linear, one idea leading to the next, leading to the next, leading to the next, and growth is a linear thing. A seed, it sprouts, grows, it gives fruit, it reproduces, etc. These are linear processes, but the emotional engagement in life isn't always a linear process. And so the way that I see this is more of not necessarily a linear process, but kind of a map of checkpoints. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to happen in this order. It just means that this is where they sit. Now, there's a little bit of orderliness to it in some ways, but I don't get too hung up when in the House of Cups. I don't get too hung up when it comes to the order of things. So when we begin, we look at the Two of Cups. Now, Two of Cups, obviously, this is, the two is always about beginnings, but here we're talking about emotional beginnings. And one of the things that is required for us to have that emotional aspect of life where the spirit is really getting value is when we engage other people. And so when two engage, each engaging their own heart, their own experiential, their own emotional experiential aspect of life, that is what we're talking about here. And basically what we're talking about is new beginnings and a recognition of that which is yours and that which is outside of you. This recognition of self and more than self. And this is really this is an important notion when it comes to emotion, because when we're children, emotion is all about one. It's all about me. It's all about I. It's all about the individual and the specific and the particular. But when we get into looking at our experience of emotion and that which drives our soul, that which matures us, that which brings meaning to our life, self is a very, very hollow place. There's only so far you can go. There's only so much you can do there. And so it's when we begin engaging others, it's when we begin engaging with things that we can begin to see the evolution, we can begin to see the elevation, and we can begin to see the strength and power. Like if we're talking about with this lion, the lion head at the top. It's where the emotional existence, it's just that recognition of there are other people, and it's self and not self that fuels the spirit. And fueling that spirit is kind of the point of this particular suit. So this entire pursuit is about fueling the spirit. It's about remembering it's about having that emotional experience of life, and that emotional experience of life, the valuable part of it, needs others. It needs self and it needs others. Now, one notion here that I want to make sure that that doesn't get overlooked is I'm in a couple of communities where I deal with a lot of charity and a lot of people who are very, very well-meaning and very good-hearted, and they want to give. They really want to go and give of themselves. And being charitable and being kind, sometimes they will do so without thinking of themselves, without thinking of what they need to do to preserve themselves. And this is also this is that note of also saying, don't forget about others, but also don't forget about yourself. That there are two halves to this conversation, and that's really where we're starting. So, with that, we move on to the three. Now, like I said, these aren't necessarily cases where these are in an order. This is more of a case where these are checkpoints, these are issues. And in this one, I have to admit that when it comes to the three, my love of Norse mythology and the Norse mythology symbolism reigns supreme. Now, in this case, it's not a hard stretch to go to the Fates, but I have a particular view that I enjoy, the Nordic view of the Fates, called the Norns. And the Norns in the poetry of the Poetic Eddas, there are three in particular. that are very important, which is Ur, Vidandi, and Skadi. Now, these are speaking to three different parts of a way of experiencing life. They're talking about everything that came up before. And I've talked about this in the Fate episode. I talked about this in other episodes. But really, this is the mechanism of fate applied as an emotional observation and an emotional experience on how we emotionally observe this paradigm. So we have everything that happened in the past. You have everything that's happening, or the decision that's being made now, and an inevitable outcome from the combination of those two. And the piece that's important to remember is everything that happened in the past is everything that happened in the past, and that there's a momentum that carries it through. If you aren't involved, there's a momentum carrying it through to an outcome that is going to be a particular outcome, and that's the way it's going to be. Our choice impacts that outcome. But one choice, one decision made in isolation very rarely impacts that outcome in an extensive way. It's repetition of choices over time made to the same cause that allows it to build up in the past as choices become the past, and then it moves the engine of momentum in the direction more toward your desired outcome. This is why people that have a dedicated drive toward a purpose, or people who just have the tenacity and the stick-to-itiveness, often see a fairly good measure of progress, at least to some degree, in the things that they take on. And this is not I'm not me. There's 100 ways that I could point this out where I could say that this is there's a mechanic to this, and there are psychological nuances here of what we're able to observe based on the questions we've asked, the words that we use, the way that we think about the challenges that we're dealing with in life, the way that we analyze our situation is all going to frame what we can understand as opportunities and possibilities of how to take it forward. But this model of fate, this model of this momentum of choices and actions and deeds all carrying through, and our engagement with it, and us engaging bit by bit with it, choice by choice, action by action in each moment, then eventually turning it so that inevitable outcome moves more toward in alignment with what we're doing. This is a easy thing for me to feel. It's using the mechanism of emotion as a short circuit to short circuit all the thought process in order to just carry through and think of it in this symbol. And in this symbol, it carries through and gives me that case of saying, look, fate's at play. We have to stick to our guns. When we are in alignment with the past, things are going to go our way because there's a lot of momentum already carrying it that way. And this is where luck comes in. This is where sustained systemic luck comes in, and you can see that. And so this card always speaks to me of that piece, of that element of life, and allowing ourselves to either challenge fate, but understanding that's a lot of work and requires a lot of repetition, or allowing us to observe what's already happening and to get in alignment with it. Both of these are options, and both of this speaks to fate and luck. And I like that as the third cup, the Three of Cups evaluation, which means it's time to move on to the Four of Cups. So the Four of Cups is an interesting one because there are a lot of I've read a lot of interpretations of this, and none of them speak well to me when I think about it in this context. The way that I've always perceived this is there is a time when we actually give a lot of contemplation to the way we feel, or we should give a lot of contemplation to the way we're feeling about a given subject. Are we hostile towards someone? Are we in love with someone? Are we being dictated by a feeling of offense, or are we being compelled by a feeling of compassion? This is that card of bringing intellect and reason in to try to bridge that gap. There's a term in business they call emotional intelligence, and I think this is the thing that they speak here. This is what we're speaking of here. It's not just being smart about emotions and how they work, but it's about understanding the mechanism of how your particular emotions work and the study that requires, and that study often requires meditation. Now, my father often referred to this as navel gazing. So not everybody's going to have a belief that there's value here. But for people that want to incorporate the entirety of the living experience, they want all aspects of it. They want the productivity, and they want the reason, and they want the sensation of a beautiful life. Then actively engaging and putting study in is important. It's like the Three of Pentacles, where you need to do some study and you need to do some work. It's like, to a certain extent, it's like the Five of Staves, where there are challenges that need to be overcome. But in this case, it's allowing yourself to feel and allowing that to be an ally, and learning how to become that ally. There's a notion here of rejection. There's a notion here of that we reject that which we don't, for a number of reasons. We reject the way we feel about a thing, hoping that, maybe we think we feel the wrong thing, or maybe we're having an emotion that we feel is one that should be rejected, and that's a challenge unto itself. So in this case, this is that active study. And this signals to me that maybe I need to stop and think about things. Maybe I need to reflect some on how I'm feeling and how those emotions are driving my actions, where that is in play, because I don't know anyone who operates without emotional motive. And this speaks to that emotional motive, and understanding it and knowing it, and making it so that you work well with it as an ally and as a friend. Now, the next one is one that I've changed a few times over the years. And that's because life experience changes the way that you learn anything. And that's the Five of Cups. In the Five of Cups, honestly, this is the card of mourning. I mean, obviously, he's wearing black. He's got, and what we're talking about is the process of mourning here. 3 cups spilled, 2 cups uplifted, meaning that we're in this in-between stage of doing things, of getting things done, of moving through a staged progression. And when you're looking at the stages of grief, look at how many there are in the classic sense. So you're moving through stages, you're moving through phases of a process. And this is a reminder to this is that reminder of mourning, that certain emotional paradigms transform and modify over time. And as they do, sometimes that ends up coming back to a portion of some kind of acceptance. Now, the other thing to remember is that the life before and the life after are not the same. And to expect them to be is an unreasonable expectation. So what's coming after this is not going to be the same as what it was before the loss or the cause of the mourning. So there's a need to understand that. There's a need to accept that, and to have a little bit of patience with yourself. Have a little bit of kindness, because some things need to happen in stages. Some cups need to be picked up one at a time. And mourning is the easy example of that. And so here's where we get into that aspect of understanding the things you take away from it. Know that there's a staged progression, understand where you are in that progression, and give yourself a break. And the other one the other notion that comes here is often something that I find with people who are in mourning is that there's often a desire to rush so thoroughly to get it over and done with, especially when they think they have a framework that understands it, that they will see steps as though they were finished before they are. And honestly, usually, in my case, whenever I've seen anything that's gone through a stepped emotional paradigm, it just, I never know when it's done until, I mean, it actually comes as a surprise to me. Every time I thought I was done, I wasn't. And then when I am finally done, it's usually something where it's found its proper place in the past. And so it now resides there, and I don't have to worry about that anymore. And then it just surprises me that, oh, we're not going through that anymore. It doesn't mean that those emotions are gone. It means that they've been experienced, they've been integrated, they've been worked with. And I am now different because of them. I have now allowed that change to happen. I am now different as I am. So the next one is a little tricky for me because I see this in others. This is a symbol of something that I see in others more than I see in myself. So, and this is the Six of Cups. And what this is the bountiful beauty, the light, and the abundance that a charitable heart, that a open and loving and free heart can provide to others. And the purity of that. In this case, I'm interpreting the flowers to be lilies, and lily is a sign of purity. And the flowers themselves, the pure love that we can have for one another. This is the place where that is experienced, and it's not, there's this leveling of humanity. There's no power play here. It's just raw, pure love manifested in some way. Now, when I say love, I don't necessarily mean romantic relationship love. I do mean the love of man for man, the love of brother for brother, sister for sister, the love of one human being for another on the basis that they're a human being. This is better represented in Indian culture than it is in the U.S. culture, but it is an element, and it's an element of life that we are, that is something that we need to keep an eye out for. We need to observe it. We need to see it when it happens, and we need to be cognizantly aware of it, because the reality is there's never enough of that. I think my mother said it once. I'm very grateful to her for the lessons of love that she's given me. And it was just a talk about that she was always struck by people who were hurting, and she always celebrated it, whether she agreed with you or disagreed with you. If what you were doing was being done out of love, she celebrated it. And because she said, there's just not enough of that. And it should be celebrated when it's seen. Likewise, Pope John Paul, there was a question. The Freemasons, we're talking about a symbol system come up by a Freemason. And the Freemasons in the Catholic Church have had a long history and have had real challenges. And as part of that, Pope John Paul II was asked, how do you feel about the Freemasons? And he said, they're doing good things for people. They're making the world better, and we need more of that wherever we can find it. And to me, that's what this is. This is the recognition of that. This is the acknowledgement of that. This is the reminder to look for it, because if you don't look for it, often it'll go unseen. And it needs to be something that we actively look for. And so there's your Six of Cups. Moving in to number 7. Let's check chat real quick. Hey, nothing. Perfect. So number 7, there's a whole lot of symbols here that honestly I should probably study more. This is a constant study. It never ends. So in my current state of this, there are all these treasures of all the things that can come from within ourselves. There are the desires, there are the loves, there are the wants, there are the hopes. And this speaks to all of those outcomes, all of those things that we desire, and the things that do manifest as a result of our living by heart. Now, the one thing that I'm always struck by here is that we want to, is that some of these are stations of position or greed or other things, and they have the possibility of limiting themselves and closing themselves off to other things. And so this is both a be aware of the fruits that the spirit can bring, but also be aware of allowing it to get derailed into particulars and denying other things. The versatility and the diversity of temptation, of intellect, of property, of wealth, of honor, of power or strength. All of these things are they're temptations. They're there. And the symbol of the one under the shroud, this is that statement of the higher self, the higher being, if you like, the Jesus, the Christ in self manifestation. And so keeping an eye on all of these things, this is the way that living through heart ends up manifesting. So the next one is one of the interesting ones for me, because a lot of people interpret this in a lot of different ways, and it gets really, really quite challenging. But for me, there comes a time when you need to take a journey following your heart. And this is where I look at this, and turning your back on certain other things. We're talking about the existence of being inspired and being driven by your heart, being driven by your soul, following a calling, regardless of whether it's going to be successful or not. Moving into darkness. I mean, we could argue that what we're looking at here is an eclipse. And so moving into that temporary darkness, moving into that temporary thing where we can't see what exactly where we're going, but we have the wealth of our knowledge, the wealth of our emotional being. We have the heart and the spirit to drive forward. And this is that notion of following and pursuing your ambitions and your dreams, and allowing your heart to guide you. Now, this taken in isolation, it's going to lead you down some really interesting roads, but it is one of those pieces of, there are times in life when we have our calling. There are times in life when we feel this is just the thing we need to do, even if it's the road less traveled, even if it's the road that means we have to leave behind something of our past or of value or something. There are those moments that happen in life, and this is the reflection of that moment. This is the contemplation piece. This is the piece where we say, all right, this is it. Are we on a journey? Have we already taken that journey? Are we in the middle of that journey? And when does that journey end? That's the part that's not, that people don't think about, is what is on the other side? When can we say that this journey has been successfully traveled? I really dislike journeys without ends. I really dislike paths and pursuits that don't have goals or don't have targets, so that I can at least stop, take a breather, and take a look and say, am I even going the right direction? You know, I like those checkpoints. I like those moments. But knowing when I'm on one of those journeys, that's the meditation here. That's the contemplation. And that brings us into number 9. Now, the number 9 was a little tricky for me, because I was very tempted. I was very tempted to say, oh, and now you've taken the spiritual journey and now you have this treasure to work with. But I think that different people at different times, at different areas, have that treasure to draw on. I think everyone has that treasure to draw on all the time. It's just a question of whether they have accessibility to it, or whether they're ready to actually engage that way. And so here's this case of all of this treasure, of all of the brilliance. I mean, the cup is the cup of Christ. It's the Holy Grail. It's the heart and spirit of what is best in man. And this is the abundance that every person has, willing to offer, willing to share, and on display. And so reminding ourselves that we too have this abundance of inner brilliance, if we just know to pay attention and know how to bring it. Now, there is a certain amount of utility here. There's a certain amount of some interpretations have been on the person showing off. I, for a long time, looked at it as a merchant, and I looked at it as selling that aspect of self, and selling your soul to a certain extent. But in my working with it, it's never provided a meditational idea that carried me forward in a way that was productive. So I kind of set that aside, and I went on to this. We all have this abundance, and are we ready? And are we tapping into it? Are we drawing into it? And are we bringing it to what we're dealing with? Are we engaging? And are we making it available for others? And then, just like in the, there are a couple of, one day I probably need to do a thing on the numbers themselves, as far as themes in certain numbers. And the next card, the 10 card, just like the 10 card in the Pentacles, being one of, now that the material work is complete, we're now ready for the spiritual work. The staves being, now that we have completed our leadership journey, or our great ambition, or our great quest, we now have all of this experience and all of this wealth of knowledge to take with us, and we carry it away. In this case, likewise, when you have gone through the rigmarole of all of the emotions of the heart, good, bad, indifferent, and you've worked your way through all of these things, then you begin to know that it's not about you, but it is a universal. And it becomes a glorious, natural element in your own life. Yes, sometimes it's hard and it hurts. And yes, sometimes it's beautiful and amazing. But when you've integrated it into your life to where you live as much from the heart as you do from the mind and from the hand. I don't mean more, I mean as much. Then you see the world operate with those physics, with that mechanic, with that sensation. And your engaging in it will redouble whatever you produce. I'm very jealous of people that have a very bright and light demeanor, because mine is a bit more serious and dour. And I see people that are just full of life, and I love spending time with them. And sometimes I even joke with one friend of mine. I say, what's it like in there? Because her outlook is almost always tremendously positive And it's amazing and silly and fun. And I think it's more fun being her than anybody else I know. Now, on the other side, you know, it doesn't mean she doesn't have bad days. And when she has bad days, that happens. And those are hard. It's true. But overall, the integration of love, light, charity, an understanding of how we feel, an understanding of where we are, and the inclusion of others, as well as aligning ourselves to take the empowerment of some form of faith. This just makes life more worth living and really illustrates the brightness and beauty of existence and light and love. And in that, I think that speaks more strongly and more passionately about what we're supposed to remember when we take communion. The voice and the words of a man who just sought to bring more light and love to the world and tried to show a world that was partially able to hear and partially wasn't, and still today is in the same boat. The remembrance that we have of those lessons of love your neighbor, of forgive others, of be strong, stand up for what is right, and seek love, to bring it, to live it. And I don't mean in a passionate or destructive way, but in that unifying and coalescing way that honestly stops us from killing each other. Eat and drink in remembrance of that potential of what we can be. That's the House of Cups. So, I hope that was enjoyable. I really want to thank you for being with me. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I want to make sure I thank my patrons. This particular series is actually a result of Katie's request, and happy to do that. If you want to become a patron, I'm at patreon.com/Miles Robinson, and I will talk to you later.